Welcome back to Close Up. One of the other top contenders in the CD2 Republican race, who has gone after Mayor Hansel very hard, calling him, quote, woke George, is Robert Burns. We sat down with him at his family business in Bedford. Why should Republicans choose you over George Hansel or Lily Tang Williams?
Well, I think I'm the clear-cut conservative and the clear-cut Republican. I mean, let's face it, I'm running against a libertarian and a Democrat. I don't even see where George differs from Custer. I mean, I can't find one policy issue. He says he doesn't like inflation. I haven't actually heard her come out for inflation, so I don't know where he differs. And then obviously Lily she's pro-choice. She wants a pathway to citizenship for illegal aliens. She campaigned, against Trump essentially when she ran in 2016 for the U.S. Senate in Colorado. She's not a Republican. She is a libertarian. There's some things that we agree on, probably guns and some stuff like that. But again, I am a Republican.
Let's talk about some of the issues. You're strongly pro-life, and you would support a fetal heartbeat bill at the federal level, which is essentially a ban on abortion after 6 weeks. Isn't that a little bit out of step with most of the voters in CD2?
No, I don't think so. I mean, first off, when you talk about codifying Roe v. Wade, most Americans really don't know what that means, and it's the 24 weeks. And when you start talking 24 weeks, 40 weeks, 12 weeks, 15 weeks, you actually start seeing different polling. Most Americans do believe that it should be something about 15 weeks or before, like we see in France and other countries. I thought it was interesting that Macron came out and kind of condemned the United States for not having the 24-week, Roe v. Wade, when they don't even have 24 weeks in France. But what we saw is even world leaders didn't understand what Roe v. Wade was. And I think the message is starting to get out there. Some of the stuff that the Democrats have been talking about, setting up boats offshore of Texas to provide abortions is ludicrous, because of course anybody can get on a plane and go to California, which of course is pushing 40-week abortions.
It seems like in this election, as you talked about the pundits, there's this setup of, it's kind of inflation versus abortion, and it's this clash of two major issues that are out there. How do you make the case to women in particular who might be outraged by the Dobbs decision that the pocketbook is more important in 2022?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, in the foreseeable future, abortion is not going to be banned in New Hampshire. If it gets under 24 weeks, I would be surprised, but it has a potential. I would vote that way, but I don't expect it actually to happen. And also, I think that when people see what affects their life, I mean, you're a 40-plus-year-old woman, you've been pushed in by the media to believe that there's this, ultimate assault that, your whole life is going to change. But when they're going to the grocery store, they actually see their life changing. They see that they can't afford stuff. We're going to see people, when we go into this recession, we're going to see people losing their houses, and they're just not going to be concerned. I think that the argument's already out there. I think people are already feeling the pinch. Nobody's being banned from an abortion in New Hampshire, but people are hurting because of inflation.
You've always been one of the stronger candidates on gun rights, and still, this is another issue. The vast majority of Americans want something to be done about mass shootings and gun violence. We know you're not going to vote for so-called gun control measures in Congress, so what would you do?
So one of the things that we have to look at is really where people are being killed and by what. And let's face it, we ignore all the gun violence in Chicago by handguns. And these aren't people who are even allowed to own guns. So we need to be going after the criminals who are actually owning guns that shouldn't be able to. We need to be enforcing the laws that are already on the books. When people start talking about red flag laws, we don't need red flag laws. We've seen multiple times where people make criminal threats on Facebook and almost nothing's done about it half the time. We saw this in multiple cases when it even involved the President of the United States, Donald Trump, where authorities just wouldn't go after people who were making criminal threats. So we need to enforce what's on the books already, and then we need to focus on, the true gun deaths and the true gun crimes in places like Chicago. And quite frankly, what we probably need is guns in the hands of responsible, legal citizens who are able to actually own guns, not felons. Restore gun rights back to the non-criminals in places like Chicago.
So specifically at the federal level, what would you do?
Well, specifically at the federal level, I mean, we're going to support legislation that allows things like a constitutional carry across the United States, or reciprocity, a national reciprocity, where if you have a gun license to carry in one state, then it's good in all states. And then, of course, in places like New Hampshire, we don't have a gun license, so we need a national reciprocity where legal gun owners non-felons can carry their guns across borders. And, we're talking about people like truck drivers, we're talking about people living in their RVs. I mean, these are their homes that they can't legally carry a gun in. And that's ludicrous.
And we expect these people to stop a mass shooting, I guess, if they're armed themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, some mass shootings would be stopped, and sometimes mass shootings are stopped. But I will tell you, every time that a mass shooting is stopped by a good guy with a gun, it gets a little blurb for about 5 seconds. I mean, it's kind of like how the CIA used to always say, like, you only know about our failures, you never know about our successes. And the thing is there are hundreds and thousands of successes a year where responsible gun owners do stop mass shootings.
A lot of Republicans pivot to mental health when we talk about guns. I notice you're not doing that right now. Do you think that's not a part of the solution, or?
I think it's part of the solution. The problem with mental health is, especially in America today, a lot of it has to deal with social media. I find it crazy that you need 21 years old to buy cigarettes, but we know that social media, Facebook, TikTok, is even more destructive than tobacco. And those are things that we should be looking at. Children should not be on TikTok and social media, 14 hours a day when they're 12, 13 years old and their brains are still starting to form. And that's the type of mental health we do need to be looking at. Mental health is definitely part of it, but I don't think it's all of it. And I think that when you hear Republicans, they constantly just say mental health is because they don't know what else to talk about.
If Republicans retake Congress, are you voting for Kevin McCarthy for Speaker?
Probably not. I'm looking at more like a Jim Jordan, and quite frankly, I wouldn't even mind bringing back Newt Gingrich. But I'd hate to say no completely, because we saw what happened with Pelosi, and all of these Democrats said that they wouldn't vote for Pelosi, but then Pelosi was the only person to vote for because everybody else kind of chickened out. So I want to say no. But, I don't want to be that guy who just says, okay, I'm going to vote for myself now because there's no other opportunities or people to vote for. I'm absolutely going to push for somebody else to be Speaker, though.
So you would be joining the Freedom Caucus?
Absolutely.
And yet, when we've talked, you've been saying something to the effect of you think Joe Biden won the election in 2020. That would put you kind of on the outside looking in within the Freedom Caucus.
Well, listen, particularly with new evidence coming out and stuff, I believe that statistically there was always enough votes for Joe Biden. Is there illegal voting going on? Absolutely. Are there discrepancies? 100%. Were there elections stolen in 2020? A ton of them. When I live in a state like New Hampshire with 400 state
Which elections, though? I mean, can you be more specific?
Yeah, sure.
That's the thing is, we've been talking about this for more than a couple of years now, but nobody's been able to pin down and say what was stolen.
We have a ton of elections across the country that were only won and lost by a handful of votes. With the amount of, motor voters, students voting here that shouldn't be voting here, possibly people voting twice, there's going to be elections that absolutely were changed by a small number of people. And I don't care whether it's president or state rep here in New Hampshire. Every election should be protected. Now, the thing that confuses me is why did the Democrats so against an audit of the election? And we're talking about people who believe that the 2000 election was stolen, the 2004 election stolen, the governor's election in Georgia was stolen. I mean, the Democrats constantly go back to stolen election, but when a Republican says it, all of a sudden he's wearing, a tinfoil hat.
The January 6th commission hearings, we're hearing a lot of Republicans just aren't watching these things, and yet we're seeing from the mouths of administration members and Republicans themselves quite a bit of coordination between the White House and some of these people who were attacking the Congress, trying to stop the electoral votes from being counted. Is that at all concerning to you?
No, and again, like we saw this again in 2000. I mean, we saw, we
didn't see an attack on the U.S. Congress in 2000.
Okay, we didn't see an attack on the U.S. Congress, but I mean, after Trump was elected, I saw riots after the inauguration. I saw limousines being burned and Starbucks being set on fire, and nothing was done about that. Now, listen, what Trump did is freedom of speech. We've seen Democrats do even far worse things in bailing out rioters during the BLM riots. We have seen attacks on the Capitol. I mean, we talked about this before. Everybody said, Trump shouldn't have said that he might pardon some people. There's people being targeted that were nowhere near the Capitol, and that is, that's crazy. And then we've seen this before where pardons were given to people who actually went in, or commutations, where actually went in and shot up the U.S. House of Representatives. And
you're going way back in history.
Yeah, going way back. Well, it was Jimmy Carter who did it.
Is there really an equivalence between people, doing something terrible, rioting, destroying storefronts, attacking police officers, bad, but then attacking the U.S. Congress when it's trying to count electoral votes. There's a difference there, isn't there?
The people who went in and vandalized the building absolutely should be prosecuted. But at the same time, there were people nowhere near the building who never did anything, who are honestly being targeted right now and by a kangaroo court that are infringing on their civil rights and going into all of their, phones, social media, and everything else on this witch hunt.
Inflation has a pesky habit of sticking around no matter what you do policy-wise to try to stop it. Things come up to a certain level and that level doesn't go back down. So if we give carte blanche to the oil companies, say, drill, get us as much domestic production as possible, and we get gasoline back down to, say, $4 a gallon or just under, but that's where it levels off again. Have we failed to see and address the real problem, which is to try and diversify energy sources so this doesn't happen to us again?
Well, I don't think we stop on trying to diversify energy options, but we also have to be smart about it. I mean, this push for wind and solar has not paid out. We need more nuclear energy. We are building a nuclear power plant right now, I believe, in Wyoming. These are small nuclear power plants, mini nuclear power plants, as they call it, and that's going to be the future. We do need to invest into battery technology. We are going to have EV cards. But let's face it, like my opponent, Woke George, everybody can't get the government to give him hundreds of thousands of dollars to put solar panels on our business to charge our EVs. That's just not sustainable. Nuclear energy is the answer.
Robert Burns, thanks for joining us on Close Up.
Thank you very much.